and welcome back to another episode of the Real Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jacob O'Connor. Real Conversations is a podcast for those dedicated to doing hard things and living a meaningful life. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Cooper Clawson. How you doing, Cooper?
I am doing good.
Is this your first podcast?
I did one back in the day when I was at Bluestein Ventures, but it was weird. It was like, I don't know, I always thought it'd be fun to be on a podcast, but I realized that if I'm ever going to do it, I should do it with someone like that I actually know well.
Yeah.
It was one of those weird, like a consultant wanted to do a podcast, and so I definitely didn't like put it out there to promote it or anything like that, which is great because I like watched that a few times and I was like, oh, there's a lot that I shouldn't ever do again on a podcast. As far as I was so uncomfortable, and it was during like the COVID times where you are on Zoom and you're always just watching yourself in the camera.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's fun to do it with someone that I'm actually friends with.
Yeah, you and I have known each other for about a year now. Is that right?
Yeah, whenever you started at the accelerator here.
Yeah, so probably about a year ago. And you're one of these people where there's so many layers to you that I think this can be a fun episode because, if you look at your LinkedIn profile, it says like local financial services or something like that. And I'm like, what does that actually mean? But then I get to know you and kind of your background and your family history and just kind of the things that you do on the day to day. And it's really cool. I mean, how you spend your time and the level of focus and dedication you have is something that, I really respect.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It takes I don't know. I was even a little hesitant to do this podcast today, because it feels weird being on a platform when you haven't accomplished anything that's like really tangible to see. But when I thought about it, it took about 12 minutes. You texted me on my drive home yesterday, and I saw the text while I was driving. I was like, I'm not sure about that. But then I was like, you know what? I wish that I had a time-stamped recording of like my dad or my grandpa when they were in their 20s. And for me, I'm about, pretty much the end of my 20s. And how cool would that be to just look back and be like, oh yeah, that's something I was going through, or excuse me, or here's some things I was thinking at the time that were totally wrong.
Yeah.
And so I was talking about that with Leah, my wife, last night. And I was like, it's going to be hilarious in like 10 to 20 years to re-listen to this and be like, wow, that guy was so naive.
Who is that guy?
Yeah, exactly. I even like cringe at, thinking about a lot of the things I knew 10 years ago, kind of when I started my career after college, that just certainly aren't true or not the way the world works or anything.
Well, I think that's the beauty of doing this is it's really uncomfortable to say things in a moment that are put online forever. And, you don't know the future repercussions of that. But the way that I've kind of mitigated that in my head is this is just documenting the journey, and it's a single data point in a long, long string of data points that will make up your entire life. And hopefully, as long as you're aiming at an upward trajectory, trying to do something cool and meaningful, then regardless of what you say right now, as long as it's focused on that same end goal of wanting to do something that you can look back at and be proud of, it doesn't really matter the content of what today is. It's just documenting this period of your time, of your life.
Yeah. Did you listen to that Patrick O'Shaughnessy podcast with Jeremy Giffen, where he talks about like
I don't think so.
It's really interesting. It talks about people like pre-fall and post-fall, and I don't know. I did a lot of reflecting after that, and I'm like, man, am I like pre-fall in my career? Is some of the hard things that happened early on were those the fall? I'm like, has it happened yet?
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree, and it's just it's the beauty of just having the focus on always learning and being curious. Is like, this is the most I know today, and tomorrow I'll probably know a lot more about what I didn't know today, right? Like,
what is that pre-fall and post-fall that you're talking about?
It was kind of his. They were talking about hiring CEOs for some of their portfolio companies, and when they were, determining, if this person was going to be successful at their company, one of the highest, kind of signal things that they looked at was whether the person they were hiring was pre-fall or post-fall, meaning had like everything in life gone right. They hadn't really been challenged or, really crossed like the Rubicon in some sort of capacity, because inevitably that happens in your business. We've been in family business for generations, and, the worst thing that's happening to you feels like the worst thing that's ever happened until it's over with. And, they were just kind of looking at CEOs and figuring out, okay, have they been through that? Because we're going to go through that inevitably at some time. And if they haven't been through that, are we confident they can get through it? And people that have been through it, like, what did they learn? How did they react? What would they do next time? it's kind of like founding or funding entrepreneurs who have done a company before and it didn't work out, right? Like you and I are both kind of in that space. And that's why I love hanging out with people that have tried something that hasn't worked. When I think of kind of my like good friends in the business world, they all have stories of something that hasn't worked out. And I'm always really cautious about just working with people that haven't had like a real challenge in their life before, because they're going to get too overconfident, and that's what kills you.
Yeah, I mean, you need that naivety to get started in the first place,
right?
But also that ignorance can kill you in the long run, especially if you're not resilient. I think that's probably what you're saying. The benefit to the post-fall, pre-fall connotation is that, like, have they done something hard and were they able to get through it? I think that's a testament to character as well.
Yeah. I used to work kind of in corporate America, Fortune 500 company, and we had a lot of our MBAs that came in during the summer. They tended to hire for folks like directly out of undergrad or MBAs. They tend to hire out of like a lot of the Ivy League schools. And you could tell, especially the MBAs who had done like the Ivy undergrad, consulting, banking, internship, and then went straight into like a top MBA, like they thought they really knew it all. And like part of the reason that sometimes they just didn't make it in the end was they didn't know how to get along with people from all different types, or, they kind of been stuck in like an echo chamber their whole career, their whole schooling. And when it came down to it, like to get things done, you have to work with people and you have to work well with people, because there's really nothing great in life that you can do by yourself. And, I believe that with a lot of the things that we've done, what I want to do in the future. And so I really value that. Like, can people work well with other people? Even if you're a specialist, like, I don't think I would ever hire someone who is like the very best at something if they can't get along with people, because you can't scale. Like you have to scale yourself. You have to kind of create little clones of yourself within the organization to be able to move on to other things that are interesting or need to address challenges, things like that. So working with people is like the top priority for me. And then that pre-fall, post-fall.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think maybe some useful context here. If I were to ask you who is Cooper Clawson, like to someone who's listening right now who's never heard of you, how would you answer that?
That's everybody. So I grew up in Southwest Kansas. Our family has a long history in agriculture, particularly for 5, 6, 7 generations in Kansas. And it was a great childhood. I learned, a lot about. We lived in a really small town. There's like two towns and 2 schools in the entire county, and so very close-knit community. And I think that having that really opened my eyes to just what it means to be in a good community, and just value people for who they are, because like it was the same people, right? It's the same people that go to church with, same people you go to school with. You're just around people all the time, which leads to a lot of my dating advice for my younger brothers from there in high school. I was like, do not date anyone from our town, because you're around them all the time.
You can't run from that.
Right. Exactly.
Hey guys, Jacob here. Real quick before we get back into the episode, I just want to take a quick second and say, you may have noticed I don't run any advertisements on the podcast. In fact, I don't make any money off the podcast. It's quite the contrary. Over the past 4.5 years, I've spent quite a lot of money, time, and effort trying to grow this show. And my life right now is incredibly hectic. There's a lot of things going on, but I believe in the podcast, and I think that it's delivering real value to you guys, and I am going to continue to do it. And all that I ask in return on the back end is that you share the link with a friend. If you guys enjoy this episode, if you're listening or watching on Apple, YouTube, or Spotify, please just go into the app, click the link, and text it to 1 or 2 people. It really does make a huge difference, and it helps me to justify all of the time, money, and effort that I continue to put into this every week. So I appreciate you guys, and let's get back to the episode.
I grew up in agriculture, working on a farm and ranch. Our family has a history of stewardship, and so a lot of those generational assets had been, passed on to siblings or grandchildren over time, and people would kind of come together to work and then go and do their own thing. And so being around that kind of my whole life was really a blessing. I don't know, it was just part of the dinner table. It's just talking business or what's going on or what our thoughts were on the world around us and how that kind of pertains to the business. And I really thought that was normal until I kind of got out there, which I went to Kansas State University afterwards. And majored in ag econ and finance. I had an interest mostly in agriculture, but working on the farm and ranch in the summers, I found out I was very allergic to like pollen from corn.
Tough.
Yeah, and when you're, outdoors in the fields, changing tires on sprinklers or gearboxes or U-joints or whatever, it was fun because I love to work. Like we grew up working a lot, so we would try to work as much as we could, take really short lunch breaks, get back out there. But I realized that probably wasn't the life that was going to be really fulfilling just from it's not fun to go back at the end of the day with like sneezing and swelling and all that kind of stuff. And so I had an interest in finance, but I didn't even know like what finance was. So our family was involved in a small local community bank. And, so I thought finance was community banking. Like I really did not know anything outside of, for 100 years, we were essentially one little community bank in Plains, Kansas. And then we had a small branch in Lakin that we acquired back in, I think, 2004. And so I went to college, and my cousin was actually graduating, and he took a job with Coke. And so, obviously we all know Coke Industries here in Wichita. Like, I was coming into my my freshman year of college, and I think I'd literally told someone, my cousin, he's going to work for Coca-Cola. Like, that was the only Coke I knew of. Like, I'm in Kansas, and I didn't even know the biggest company in Kansas. And so that was kind of how naive I was. And so, got to learn a lot in college about finance. I had a really good professor who opened my eyes to a lot of what was out there as far as the investment world and, how finance is really embedded in every type of business. And you can use, a lot of the lessons of investing and capital allocation there. He passed away this January, like really suddenly. He wasn't that old. It was like 2 days before classes started, but
dang.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I talked to him like this last fall, but his passion in life was like exposing, I think kids who come to just a state school, like what is the world of finance? Like he took us on trips to Boston, Chicago. We even took an international trip with him. We did it off the books. I'll say this now since he's gone. People at the university might not like it, but he was also just very like fiscally conservative. Yeah. And so he also wanted his students to like not pay that much money because he knew, a lot of students don't have a lot of money in college. And so instead of going through like the formal internationals office or whatever, he just booked the whole thing. Like our entire trip to Ireland and inter-country travel, Ireland, London, Amsterdam, that trip I think cost $1,200 for like 9 days.
That's pretty cheap.
Right. And that's how he was with everything. And he actually took us up to another really cool thing that he had. He had a relationship with Warren Buffett.
Just randomly?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. He, for years, had been taking students up there to have lunch with Warren Buffett and then also to the annual shareholder meeting.
Wow.
In May. And there were some other like student groups at that lunch. And it was kind of hilarious. It was like Harvard MBAs, Stanford MBAs, Kansas State undergrads. But he had just these relationships everywhere. And I think part of what I learned early on about relationships was from him, like just how powerful those were. I mean, you and I both love podcasts. Kind of why we're here today is we talk a lot about podcasts and about a lot of the things we are learning or listening to. And the first podcast I ever listened to, and I'd encourage people to go and look this one up, was a guy named Pat Dorsey. He's a investor in Chicago. He used to work at Morningstar, which is like an equity research company. And the investment program at K-State was big on like equity research during my time there. And it was another relationship that Scott, our professor, had. And so on that trip to Chicago, we actually met this guy, and he had a hedge fund and everything that he was running. And so back to the podcast, Pat Dorsey was on Patrick O'Shaughnessy's podcast.
Okay.
And you know the ending question to all of his podcasts. Don't. So the ending question to all of Invest Like the Best podcasts is, what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
Huh.
And, this really successful guy who ran this huge equity research, division of Morningstar and then went on to start his own fund. He's like, so there's this professor at Kansas State University who knew I wanted to meet Warren Buffett at some point and was able to make me a adjunct professor.
Wow.
To come along on that trip to Omaha and meet him. I probably messed that up. You can go listen to the podcast, but Scott just had like that impact on people and really just taught me a lot about not only relationships, but just a lot of the technical things in finance as well. Like you would have loved his class. Actually, 2 of his classes, the entire semester was just reading books. So, I was telling you about that book the other day when we were meeting for our peer group, that one by Joel Greenblatt. That was one of the books we read in his class. And so you just felt like you came out like armed with so much, not just technical knowledge, but also like qualitative knowledge on, okay, I can take this idea from this book and apply it over here.
Right.
And that was just part of his class. And so, yeah, he was fantastic. Really miss him. But I mean, he's definitely one of the mentors that kind of showed me the rest of the world of finance, which led up to my first job outside of college. And actually my last job at K-State, I worked at the foundation on the endowment team. So we invested the funds that donors gave to the school. And our priority at that time was really expanding the venture capital portfolio for the endowment. And so I spent a lot of time, we were a really close team. There was an investment analyst who's full-time, and then we had our director of investments, and then our CIO, and then 2 quote unquote kind of like interns. And so my last year at K-State, I go to class and I go to work. I think it's a great hack, by the way, if you can find like something while you're in college, like you did with Rob. Find something you're interested in that you might want to pursue career-wise, and then like leverage that to the hilt. So my time was spent looking at all these venture capital managers and some private equity as well. And yeah, every time after I would have one of those meetings, I would follow up with the investment manager and say, hey, really enjoyed this. And whatever they were interested in. Cause I like didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do like equity research, like pick this stock versus stock. Cause that's kind of all we learned in college. And pretty soon I learned about venture capital, learned about private equity. And so to really grow my network, of which I had like not that many folks in, I would follow up with them and say, hey, really enjoyed this. And I'm really interested in going into fill in the blank, whatever they were doing. And I'm interested in moving to Chicago after school. Who are 2 people that I should meet in fill in the blank industry in Chicago?
Why Chicago?
So on one of those trips that we took to New York, we met with a hedge fund manager up there, and we had dinner with him afterwards after going to his office. And he just gave some really good advice, really successful hedge fund manager. And you're kind of like, how did this guy from Kansas State go on to have this multi-billion-dollar hedge fund in New York? And he said like what he had focused on was finding the place that he wanted to be and then just focusing on that place in particular. Like a lot of people will come out of school and they'll say, I want to do investment banking. And then they'll go and apply to New York and Chicago and Dallas and California and Minneapolis and all these different places. And it's already hard enough for people who come from a state school to kind of work into kind of that higher level of finance world. And what worked for him really well was just focusing on New York and just kind of creating density within that network. And so after hearing that, that was my junior year. So I was just about to start the foundation. I really took that to heart. And one of my friends, actually, I'm not going to take credit for this idea. One of my friends told me about how he was networking. And he's like, well, we learned about compounding and finance, which, how fast that works. So I just ask every person I meet, who are 2 other people I should meet?
Beautiful.
And before you know that, like I had a spreadsheet in college and like, it just fills up so fast. And so I think by the time Leah and I actually moved to Chicago, like I had 100 people that I'd already met with in Chicago.
Love that.
Even though like I'd only been up there 2 or 3 times, kind of while pursuing that career. Cause most people said no. Like if I was asking for a job, it was like, I had a good GPA, but not like a great GPA or anything. So, it just wasn't a fit for a lot of people, but I met a lot of folks, and I would do this thing where if someone agreed to, meet, I'd say, hey, can we go grab coffee on Monday? And it'd be like Thursday. And they'd be like, sure. I said, great, I'll see you then. And then I'd go book a flight. and
that's me with the podcast.
Yeah. And then I would like ping everyone else on that list and be like, hey, I'm going to be in town tomorrow and Monday and Tuesday. Do you want to meet up? And it's like, you could fill up your calendar so fast with meeting for people. And they're always like, wow, you're so intentional, come in here meeting with me. And it was like, yep, decided that on Thursday.
Dude, that's literally what I do with the podcast is if there's a guest that it's like, oh, this could be a big guest. I tell them I'm going to be in town this time period, would love to connect.
Yeah.
And I've got nothing booked. And then as soon as they say yes, I'm hitting everyone else up in the town trying to get as many podcasts so you get the bang for buck there.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's honestly what, now that I've been out of school for a while and seen quite a few industries, like that's what salespeople do all the time. Like they find an excuse to get in front of people. And having grown up on like a farm and ranch, like sales was never a part of our culture. And even really at the bank, it was very relationship based, but more kind of passive relationship based. People were there, they're going to come in to do business. You never had to focus on selling yourself or what you did, right? Like people need a bank, people need corn or cattle. And so now that I've kind of been outside for a little bit, having seen that, I'm like, wow, there is so much power in just like taking a chance and putting stuff out there. And then showing up. Like you have to show up, obviously. You have to come armed. Like a lot of those people I talked with, like they would ask, like, what are 2 stocks you're like thinking about right now? And you'd better have some in your back pocket, and you'd better have like a really good idea of why those were a good investment for that fund. So yeah, that kind of led me up to Chicago. The company I went up there for, they were raising a fund to do both like fund-to-fund investments, so investing in other managers, which is what we had been doing at the endowment in agriculture, and then do direct investments as well. And my job was to find those investments and investment managers for them while they were raising the fund. And kind of long story short, they didn't end up getting the fund raised. And so I was like month 5 in Chicago, and I'd signed like a year lease on our apartment. And they're like, yeah, I just don't think this whole thing's going to work out. And they all had other jobs. Like this was kind of their side hustle, was getting this thing started. And I was like, well, this is like my only job. So, and I've got this expensive rent that I got to pay. And so that was, I don't necessarily know if that was my fall in life, but it sure felt like it at the time.
Right.
Like, I was really excited. I spoke at my my graduation. Like I was a student speaker, had done really well in school, had, done this finance test called the CFA, did level 1 coming out of it. Like I was just on top of the world, was going to work for a quote unquote private equity fund, which is really cool as like an undergrad. Mm-hmm. And then getting in there and they're like, well, yep, this just isn't going to work out. Like you can still show up here to the office and work out of our office if you want, but like we can't pay you. We're not going to pay you. And you just got to find something else. And that was really tough on like the ego, as well as, the pocketbook. Fortunately, Leah had found a job in marketing, which is what she really enjoys, to kind of hold us over during that time. And it was tough, but it was also a blank slate. So one of the things, that I was always curious about, because we were focused on kind of upstream agriculture, like crops and processing plants and things like that. One of the things I was always curious about was, man, why are we looking at so many of these organic opportunities, or regenerative ag was like a new term back then? Like, why are we caring about this? We grew up on a pretty, we were good stewards of our land, and we had started no-tilling when I was younger, but I never really understood why, like what drove that, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. And I realized it was the consumer, the purchaser of food products was the reason that we were changing a lot of practices over time, and why a lot of people were changing practices and putting a lot of money into it. And so when I was going to look for kind of my next gig, there's this really cool opportunity at Kraft Heinz that showed itself working in their new ventures group. And do you know the history of Kraft Heinz?
I do not
at all.
I think for the group you should explain that.
Yeah. So Kraft Heinz is a really unique company. So I don't know, it's kind of full circle here. Berkshire Hathaway, which is owned by Warren Buffett.
Right.
Yeah. So they partnered with a group out of New York called 3G Capital, and they bought Heinz, the ketchup company, which also owned a ton of other brands. And it was private at the time, and they did kind of the first, well, not the first, but one of the first like what we've heard in the past is SPACs, like a reverse merger. So Kraft, the food company out of Chicago, like this old, food company, been around forever, kind of a stalwart company, they were publicly traded. And so Heinz approached Kraft about merging, and essentially they went public by merging with Kraft. So now 3G and Berkshire Hathaway essentially had control of Kraft Heinz for the most part. And it was a really interesting culture. Kraft Heinz at that time was run by a lot of folks in upper management or at the exec level that were from 3G, which is actually, it's a Brazilian, for the most part, Brazilian private equity fund. So it was kind of weird. You go into this, you're like the Kool-Aid Man and Heinz and Kraft Singles, and everyone's speaking Portuguese.
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And I love intense cultures. And one of the reputations that Kraft had, you can go read their Glassdoor and everything. It's like, want us to work a lot of hours, really intense financial management. Like most CPG companies, consumer packaged good companies like Kraft Heinz, are run by the marketing organization, and finance is support. And Kraft Heinz is a little different. It was, and I don't know if this is the right way or not, but this is just the way it was, and why it was interesting was it was very finance driven, which for me, kind of having a background, was really interesting. So I was like, okay, I can learn a lot about the consumer. It's a culture that's very intense that I craved. I really wanted to push myself. And yeah, that just kind of led me to the team. And so our team they had started an e-commerce group within Kraft. And they had...
Is it Kraft like the Kraft macaroni brand?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
and
Heinz like ketchup and Kraft like the macaroni brand.
Yeah, exactly. And they have hundreds of brands across the world even. And so, yeah, getting in there and seeing there's a reason the Kool-Aid Man commercials are on the TV. They're making money from that.
Yeah.
And seeing the power of marketing spend and how that works, and seeing the power of good execution on the manufacturing side and really running that tightly was so cool. I had no idea how factories worked, or how quick turnaround times of producing food products or putting them on the shelves, or how the negotiation works with grocery stores or anything like that. That was so cool.
Just getting that behind the scenes look at it.
Yeah. And Leah worked for Tyson at the time, and she was on the marketing side.
Tyson like chicken.
Yeah. And so she actually had to sign an NDA or something like that. And it was hilarious because in the NDA, she's like, should I sign this? They know you work at Kraft. And I was like, well, we're not you're doing your thing. We're not even competitive, because I was working with startups at Kraft.
Right.
Right. And so, the NDA was you can't talk about this for as long as a relationship lasts. And we're like,
oh,
and we're like, is that our relationship or Leah's relationship with Tyson? So we were a nightmare to go to the grocery store with. We would be in the grocery store, I kid you not, for 1 to 2 hours.
Oh no.
Going and checking out pricing and different products and different mixes and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It's cool how that kind of stuff gives you a different perspective on it. Something as the everyday consumer, it seems so insignificant, but then you having that background information, everything becomes so much more fascinating.
Right. Yeah, you will never go into a restaurant again, and
I already don't.
Right, you can't unsee it, and that's how it is in grocery stores for me, or in agriculture, or in banks. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. You kind of have the Matrix view, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So to continue on with the Kraft Heinz here, you end up in some sort of, what was the progression? Was it partner, or was it, you ascended pretty quickly, if I remember?
Well, no, we had a really flat group in that digital group at Kraft Heinz.
Okay.
So our group it was e-commerce. We had an incubator, which was called Evolve Group. And it's confusing because the corporate venture group from Kraft at the time was called Evolve Ventures. So Evolve Group was the incubator side, where we would go and find teams of 3 or 4 from within the company, or we'd even hire from outside the company, or do a small acquisition and bring them in and basically say, hey, this is an area we think is really interesting. We're not going to go after it with our Kraft macaroni brand. We don't want them to go figure out the next hottest thing within consumer. We're going to give you some money and some time, and we want you to go test a bunch of things. And so that was part of it. Joint ventures. We had a joint venture with Oprah. That was one of the things I worked a lot
Winfrey?
on. Yeah. Yeah. So I never met her. Definitely the finance guy, low on the totem pole. But she was wanting to launch like a food brand. And so it wasn't really successful. There was a lot of capital put into it. And I learned a lot about, structuring those celebrity kind of relationships with products and like how to think about what does a consumer actually want. Like, yeah, a lot of people watch Oprah and they buy books because of Oprah, but they don't necessarily buy, I'm thinking of some of the products we had at the time. They don't buy cauliflower pizza because Oprah said to buy it.
The official pizza of Oprah.
Right. And it had something to do with like her garden in Maui, and we were introducing vegetables into the food and whatever. Yeah, it was interesting. It was a good shot though. I mean, they tried and they learned something, but yeah, I would be cautious of partnering, just not with her in general, but just cautious of partnering with celebrities in general, like in making sure that you have the right incentives aligned for everyone, that you have the right products. Our products are okay. That you have the right products, and the most important thing, do people want it? So,
what do you think of all those celebrity like tequila brands? Like The Rock's got one, and then a couple others.
Well, I'd say tequila is a lot more addictive than cauliflower pizza.
You clearly haven't tried cauliflower pizza.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it comes down in part to a lot of the operators to make it happen on the back end, like partnering one with the right celebrity for the right brand. And do they really represent, do they have a connection between the buyer of tequila and the person, right? Like most of the people who watch like a rock movie probably drink alcohol in some capacity, or some at least, or it's just a big enough audience, right? Like if you just look at the amount of people that drink alcohol in the United States, like The Rock, everyone probably knows him, and that's a big market. So yeah. I think the issue, when I kind of thought about it a little bit, is Oprah appealed to a lot of people, like probably 20% of the population in the United States. But then you have to put a Venn diagram over that of, okay, but who cares about cauliflower pizza or cauliflower mashed potatoes or whatever?
Many fewer people.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a matchup of, and it's like startups, right? So it's a matchup of the founder or kind of the personality of the company, the people who need the product, and then your ability to execute in the middle. And so when those things align, like, man, do they align?
Well, and The Rock's works too, because he's very well known, but he's got just this kind of, he's a cool public figure where people kind of idolize him. He's in great shape. He's the star of these great movies, but he also has like this kind of hustle culture mentality about him where you always see him in the gym. He's working out. He's catching late flights back. But then if he unwinds with his choice of alcohol, that's his tequila, and he's a healthy guy, clearly this is a healthier version of tequila, just drawing that assumption based off of like him and his physical and what his values are. But also if even someone who works as hard as him needs a little bit of that time to relax. And I feel like that just sells the product even better than if it's someone who is known they don't drink at all and they want to partner with someone on a tequila brand. That just is a misalignment.
Yeah, and I think the point in time matters too. I think that food brand with Oprah might have been more successful in the early 2000s or late 1990s. She was of incredible fame when they signed the deal, and I think probably was making the most money she'd ever made. But being in touch with the buyer of that product, it wasn't that point in time. Versus The Rock, he's cranking out movies like every quarter, every 6 months or whatever. He's in the peak of his performance and the peak of his probably earnings, right? At the same time, hers was like the peak of her performance actually came before the peak of her earnings, because she realized, start owning a lot of this stuff, like the part of the food brand, her network, all that kind of stuff. It's when those things align that I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think most celebrities have that figured out now. Like what's the quote? You get the bag. Like, isn't that what everyone says?
Yeah,
like,
you gotta get the bag.
yeah. And you get it when the opportunity strikes. So, that was an example. And I don't fault anyone at Kraft or Oprah or anything like that, because I love when people shoot their shot and try.
Yeah.
Like she had never, to my knowledge, had a food brand before. Like, why not? Why not try that? And as Kraft, why not go partner with this person from Chicago who was, right next door? So, I think it was so cool. And there's just so many lessons to learn. And it's great as a junior person to be with a group that's trying something new, where you might lose your salary or something if the thing doesn't work out. But you're like the leverage of learning you'll have on that experience will just be phenomenal. So I always encourage people early on to be in a place that will pay you, to be clear. Had that experience where that didn't obviously work out with the first one. But be willing to try stuff because you can rebound so much quicker than people later on in their career. You haven't specialized really yet. Or if you have, you're still super malleable. You can jump back and forth like player card, right? Nothing to do with restaurants, right?
Well,
except I know.
Disagree.
I know. Yeah. You were talking with restaurants about,
Yeah.
But it didn't teach you how to flip an egg, right?
Right.
It didn't teach you how to operate a restaurant, but the ability of marketing a restaurant you learned.
Yes. And you have a lot less to lose when you can be so much more nimble when you're younger. Like you were married at that point, but
right.
you didn't have any kids. You don't have a house at that point. You're just paying rent on an apartment. And it's basically like, can you feed yourself and can you take care of like your minimum necessities? And then everything else is like free play. Go build something cool.
Yeah. And I did that when they stopped paying me. I immediately went and signed up to be an Uber driver because I did that math in my head. I was like, okay, here's Leah's salary. And if I can go make, X amount of money per month, then we can live. And we'll be fine. And that was really freeing too, to know that you had a backup plan like that. I only did it a couple times. It was very entertaining.
I can only imagine Chicago.
Very entertaining. But yeah, just giving it a shot early on is super fun. And I think it also gave me the flexibility to wait because from the time those guys in my first job stopped paying me to when I accepted the craft offer was like 5-6 months.
Right.
And so we were just living on Leah's salary, some savings, and, just really waiting for the right thing to hit.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like you really built a network and worked like in that corporate America venture capital space for the beginning of your career. And then now, I might be wrong, but it seems like you're almost more entrepreneurial now in the things that you do. And I feel like it's been kind of the opposite for me where it's just been go try and do something entrepreneurial and less on the corporate side. Have you seen like a large benefit in the route that you took, or like looking back at it, would you do anything differently?
Yeah, entrepreneurship. I once again didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
It was just, there was the family business, I guess. I didn't think that was really entrepreneurship. It was more of stewardship and things like that. But I knew that it was interesting. So my last semester at college, I met this interesting guy, Trevor McKeeman, and he had started a company called Hitchpin. And I started helping him kind of ideate and come up with his investor presentation, built the financial model that we were going to use for the presentation as well as the business. Like there's so much in agriculture. It's a marketplace for agriculture, and trying to figure out where we wanted to go first. And those were the two job options I actually had coming out of college, was to stay in Kansas and work on Hitchpin or go to Chicago. And it was a really tough decision. I really like Trevor, really like the market he's going in. And he taught me a lot about entrepreneurship. Like what Scott Hendricks gave us books in that finance class, Trevor did the same thing with entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So, I learned about cap tables really early on. I learned about some of the best entrepreneurs. Like he gave me a lot of books on Airbnb and Tesla and Elon Musk and all that, like my last semester, but I didn't have time to like focus on that as a career. And I knew that Leah and we both knew that we wanted to get out for a while before we came back, if we ever came back. And I don't know if I'd mentioned this one of the rules that our family has is if you want to come back to work for the family, you have to go get your degree and go work somewhere else for at least 2 years before you came back, which was really freeing. That wasn't necessarily the case with my parents' generation. It wasn't a rule that they had to come back. It was just like expected. And most of them did. And I think some of the value that my dad and uncle, who work together now, and my mom and aunt, they were all part of these discussions, were giving us the freedom to go try something else and figure out just how to be a human being, how to fall, really, how to see how other people do things. And then if the timing is right and the opportunity is right, like come back. So
do you think that helped with why you're so focused and driven now? Like I've had a lot of people on the podcast that are multi-generational in their family business or have very successful family businesses. And I only interview the ones that are still like actively pursuing things and not just sitting back on their loins. But like Do you think that 2 years where you had to go do something else is the reason that you are the way you are today, or what is it about that for you?
Maybe. I mean, everyone's different. Like, I love my family. I've got cousins and siblings and everything, and everyone's just different to start out with. Like, I don't really judge anyone's career path as being good or bad. It's just, I hope that they're doing whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. And for me, like, focusing on the family business, that's your question, right? Like, why? I saw a lot of it in the way that my grandfather, he passed away here in March. He's 89 years old. In the way that he had done business my whole life, and his approach to it was that of stewardship. And so he
could you define stewardship? You've used that a few times.
Yeah, so it means a few different things to different people. Like, I think of stewardship as not only just stewarding assets, because I think that is a lot of the way that family businesses do it, is they'll buy a bunch of real estate and then people own it for generations. And I don't think that's necessarily the right view of stewardship. Like, our goal in life shouldn't be to grow corn on this circle until the end of time.
Yeah.
Like, it's cool and profitable, but stewardship to me means that you're stewarding your family first and foremost. Like, hopefully the business does well, but I think the most important thing is that your family has the opportunity to do well. Obviously, everyone will choose their different paths. So, one, stewarding the family and stewarding the learning. And two, partnering with people who are a part of the business, whether that be people that work for us. Some of our farmland, we don't farm, our neighbors farm it. And that was really unique. And I've learned that now, having seen a lot of different operations. Like, we'll farm a quarter of corn, like 160 acres. Mm-hmm. And then instead of us farming the one right next to it, a neighbor farms it for us as a tenant, and we're the landlord. And that's a really unique thing. A lot of people rent out their farmland for people to farm, mm-hmm. or people farm it themselves. But it's rare to find people that do kind of both. And it's kind of symbiotic in nature. And Grandpa always had that view of, there's more than enough to go around. We don't need to hoard everything that's quote unquote ours. And it's our responsibility to support the up and coming people, especially younger farmers who may not have had an asset base to work with, to support them and let them do their own thing. Like, we won't always agree with the way that they manage the land, but we think that they're good people in general and that they'll manage it profitably because they need to farm it next year. Mm-hmm. And I think when you give folks that control, you can learn from that as well. Like, you can see what they're doing, and maybe that helps us change a practice on our farm or ranch. And a lot of times, like, people have better yields than we do. And I think that's really cool because we can learn from that, and we're not like digging into exactly what they're doing, but we can say, hey, we can get better. Like, what we're doing today isn't the best that we can do in the future. And I think that's just really cool. So yeah, it's the stewardship of the assets, of the culture and the family, and of the relationships with people that we have.
That's really cool. And I think part of the question too, the family business in it of itself is great, but I think you could have coasted a little bit more through life and taken an easier path. But one of the reasons that I love hanging out with you and talking with you is you're always working on something. You're always very focused. You're very dedicated to doing a lot of different things and doing it to the best of your ability. And I guess my question is, like, why is that the case for you?
It's a good question. Part of it's work ethic that I learned. And then I think part is the work ethic and the focus that I just kind of embodied throughout the first part of my career. Like, I learned work ethic from my mom and my dad. My mom she's still living. My mom is, a wonderful person, and she just does everything to a 10 as far as effort and not perfection, but just performance. And that was evident through learning musical instruments really young. Like, I can play 5 instruments today because my mom put me in a lot of classes.
That's sweet.
Right. Yeah. It's super cool. And I used to hate it growing up. And it's funny, like, her teaching me, she didn't teach me herself, but we had, piano teachers and guitar teachers and drums and all that. Her purposefully spending the time to drive us a long ways, because we lived out in the middle of nowhere. It's 30 miles to our piano teacher. and she would drive us every single week. Just the intentionality that she had with saying, hey, you're going to focus on this and watch yourself become good at it. And a lot of it was things that we didn't necessarily like or want to do at the time. But she was just really patient with us and, just taught us the value of just doing the work. And I also learned capitalism from her because early on, I definitely did not want to practice piano. And so she'd say, okay, after piano lessons, we can go to Brahms. You've been to Brahms before?
Yeah.
And we'll go get an ice cream cone. And I was like, okay, that's great. I'll go to piano lessons. And then she's like, all right, you need to practice every single day, do each song 3 times. And we also had competitions where you had to memorize like 10 songs and play them in a row. It was called Guild. It's so funny. I haven't thought about this stuff for a long time. But she's like, okay, you need to practice. And I was like, I can't eat that much ice cream. Like, there's no reason to practice. She said, okay, every time after you practice your full set 3 times, you can have a quarter. And so you learned how to save money, like from the age of, I think I started piano when I was 5 years old or something like that. And so I was pumped mostly to get that quarter. But also, when it paid off at the recital time or whatever, I mean, that was just really cool. And so a lot of that focus comes from her really intentionally, making sure that we as kids were involved in things. And, that included, going to church and being involved in a lot of church programs and camps and things like that. And then later 4-H, which is actually how Leah and I met, was through that program, to working on the business side with Dad. It was really a true apprenticeship program, and I didn't realize it growing up. Mm-hmm. Riding around with him on Saturday mornings or after school or during the summers every single day, he was just so open about the why behind everything that we did. And sometimes you had to ask, like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we digging this hole in the middle of nowhere? Or why are we, moving this cow right now? And he was always just one, we're going to get the job done. And yeah, it's hot and you're tired, but we're just going to get the job done. And he was just very open with what was going on. Like sitting in that passenger seat, I got to see Dad interact with people and in both business and life, just in general. Mm-hmm. And, see him interact with people that worked for us and see people lie to his face, see people who didn't think he would find something out about what they were doing. And he was always just so patient with people just in general. And because most of the things he'd seen before, he came back right away and had been involved with the family business. And what's that quote from David Cinder? It's like, history doesn't repeat, but human nature does.
Yeah.
Like he's just seen so much. I feel like he, even being young, like when I was riding around with him, he was in his 30s, like he just had such an old soul already. And a lot of that came from being around my grandpa, mm-hmm. who, they've had very similar personalities. Just seeing him work most days, but also focus on his family and include them in what he was doing. So did he work a lot of hours? Yeah, but he included us in that. And so it felt like we were always hanging out doing stuff together. And I didn't realize how much he was actually working until I started thinking about it. I was like, wow, we used to work a lot. And it didn't seem like a lot to me because I go to school and then we'd go do something, or Saturday was just, we got something to do on Saturday and it was fun. So yeah, I learned a lot from both of them on how to work. And then during college, I just kind of figured out that was kind of the equation of life. Like there's a good amount of luck involved in your career. There's a good amount of work ethic and a good amount of learning and curiosity. That learning and curiosity came from reading all those books that Scott put in front of us. You have to be curious and want to learn, but then you also just have to put in the work and show up. So yeah, it's kind of a combination of those two things that you can quote unquote control. And then you have to have some luck and serendipity.
Do you believe in balance?
Not really. I think balance is good for a building that's standing still. I don't think balance is necessarily good when something's in motion because, I mean, you can't move forward without giving yourself some, opportunity of going out of balance. Like, most of the time you're going along just good and then sometimes you trip a little bit and that's life. I mean, I I think you should focus on one, kind of your inner purpose of why you're doing it. And if you're moving towards that, I think you can move towards it in a lot of ways, like whether it be moving towards it by working, moving towards it by the relationship you're having, with your spouse or your friends or whoever. And it all just kind of culminates into, I don't know, it's not balance. It's more like Jell-O. It kind of wiggles around a little bit. That's life, man. You're just always just kind of moving around. It's never a perfect shape. Like it's just, but it all comes together, and it's a lot of fun.
I always think that like life finds a way to balance itself out. Like whenever you are maybe doing too much in one area, like you're putting too many hours in, you'll get sick, and your body will force you to take a little bit of time to recuperate, or you're neglecting your relationship, and then things start to hit the fan, and then that will force you to recuperate and to get more maybe in balance. And I think there's little ways you can tweak that to make it more sustainable, make sure you're taking care of your health and your mental and everything. But I don't know, it just seems boring to me to want a life that is completely balanced. And I think it's way more fun to just dive headfirst into something and to chase it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why, like, I'm not a classical musician, because I enjoy playing piano, but the thing that really got me excited was learning something like 80% of the way, and then the fear of getting to the recital and I don't know if I'm going to hit a wrong note. Like, that's exciting to me.
Right.
And trying to get that last 10 to 20% of perfection is of no interest to me at all. Like, I don't want to sit on a bench and get something quite to perfection. I want to learn the new thing, or, have a little uncertainty in my life. And you can create that by working on a lot of different things. And on some things you do really need to focus, right? Like in the world of banking that I'm in today, like you need to be exact. And that's why as an organization, we have people that are exact in a lot of different things. Like I'm not in control of balancing the books at the end of the day. That's not something I really have an interest for, but it's something that has to happen. And I have a ton of respect for the people who love watching like those 2 decimal points line up. And yeah, I think it's just figuring out early on, like, what do you enjoy? And are you kind of being true to your personality? And we take personality tests pretty seriously at a lot of our family businesses.
Really?
Yeah. So we'll do, the, what's it? Myers-Briggs or Briggs-Myers, something like that. And then the DISC one, and then there's a few others. And we do them periodically a lot of times with our executive teams to figure out not only like who we are, but also are we missing something? You talked about balance earlier. There's balance in an organization, and I do believe there needs to be balance in an organization. Like people are naturally pretty spiky in one thing. Like that person who is just drilled into figuring out if the 2 decimals line up, we need that person. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they might not be thinking about the business 10 years from now. They're like, hey, this needs to be exactly perfect at the end of the day for this business to work today. And you need someone else thinking about 10 years from now, 5 years from now, kind of like that on your team. So I think there needs to be balance in organizations. I don't think there necessarily has to be balance in my own life. And that, like you said, it bubbles up really quickly when something's not quite right. And I don't think everything can be perfect. Like I said, I don't chase that last 20% of perfection really in any areas of my life. Like even relationships, like my relationship with family, friends, Leah, my wife, isn't going to be perfect, but it needs to be like 80% of the way there all the time, and then getting better. So I think it's just more the mental kind of piece of just always wanting to improve those.
And to kind of bring everything full picture here, can you do like a quick summation of you were at Kraft Heinz and then what you're doing today?
Yeah. So, man, this is like the longest intro.
We're still on the first question, man.
Sorry, you can tell me to speed things up along too. I don't know. It's just fun to reflect on some of this with you. I really don't do it that often.
No, I like it. That's the benefit of the podcast. But I have all this background information. I just want to make sure that people get to the point of what you're doing and how you got there real quick.
Yeah. So Kraft Heinz was a lot of fun. I realized I didn't want to work for a public company forever. It just didn't fit my, personality at all. Like they're growing up in a business with family and just smaller organizations kind of throughout a lot of my internships and stuff. You needed to be able to do things quickly, and big organizations that's not their strength. Mm-hmm. Their strength is doing things perfect and having the pricing power and economics and all that kind of stuff. So and I wasn't in an investing role there either. I was working within the organization. So I wanted to get back to the investing. And I knew that at some point I would want to go back to work for the family business. And so one of the things that was really interesting is I learned about family offices while I was kind of in the investment world. And a family office, I think you might have explained this before, but is and what's funny is I'm about to generalize family offices, but the rule in family offices is when you've met one family office, you met one family office, meaning that they're all unique. So a family office is really, a family, whether that's like a nuclear family or like a spread, like multi-generational family, coming together and pooling their assets in some way to work together. And some family offices own just real estate. Some family offices invest in the stock market or in venture. And I really just wanted to get back to that world. And being on kind of the innovation of Kraft Heinz, I knew I wanted to go check out the venture capital world. I had learned a lot about that when I was at the foundation at K-State. And one of the people that I had networked with shortly after I got to Chicago posted an opportunity that one of his friends was hiring at a firm called Bluestein and Associates. Bluestein, yeah. Okay. Bluestein and Associates. And they rebranded while I was there to Bluestein Ventures. And the Bluesteins are a really interesting family. The matriarch and patriarch they each just had phenomenal careers. And really, I think, are the epitome of what you can accomplish in a career from really just starting out with no advantage. And their son, Andrew, was kind of running it for them. And then they had a friend that was a partner. Her name was Ashley Hartman. And yeah, they just posted an opportunity for an analyst to join their team. And they were investing in the seed and Series A portion of startups in the food industry. And that's kind of why they brought me on, is because I came from, Kraft Heinz, so understood a lot of the operational nature of that, and then had a little bit of investing experience. And yeah, we were looking to just, invest their capital at the time. And eventually they decided to raise a fund. And that was at the time where I decided to come back to work at our family's bank. And it was amazing. I call it, I tell people I got my MBA, my master's at Bluestein Associates, because I firmly believe that my 2 years working with them were way better than any like institutional MBA you could get, because you're such a small team. And we would invest in, 5 to 10 companies per year. And we looked at so many. Like during my time there, I think I got to talk to over 1,000 entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And, we invested in probably 10 to 15 or so during that time. And then you just got to do due diligence on a whole, just so many different businesses. Like they didn't just invest in brands or anything like that. They also did food tech. They also did software within the food industry. So you got to understand how the software world works. You got to understand how the food tech bio world works, and how the consumer world, like I had at Kraft, how that works. And yeah, it was just so cool. So yeah, I had a great experience there. Have a really good relationship with them still. I think they're great, and love what they're building, because they're expanding too. They're entrepreneurs in their own right. Like their family office that is now a venture fund, that is an entrepreneurship journey in its own too. So I got to see that while I was there. And you're like, how do you get to the entrepreneurship world? Well, I realized you can innovate within your family business. Like they did it. I've seen it done through our family's business over time, through generations. And a lot of times there's kind of one or two things, like new companies that get started per generation. But yeah, it was just such a great experience, and just got to learn a lot while I was there.
And so you saw that opportunity at Bluestein, and then you wanted to go back to the family business and try and replicate some of the things you'd seen there?
That wasn't necessarily how it all went down.
Yeah.
So while I was there, our CEO at the bank, his name is Gene Dykman, phenomenal guy. He had been a mentor of mine for a while. So his first year at our family's bank was in 2013, 2014. And we brought him on with the idea of turning the bank into really a growth business. It'd been a fantastic business, throughout the generations. Ag was definitely kind of the main focus of what the growth was coming from. And the family said, hey, we want to grow the bank, but we need to bring in someone who has experience growing a bank. And Gene had experience, growing a bank from, low hundreds of millions to nearly $1 billion during his time. And he'd been bank president forever. Like he'd been a bank president since he was 29 years old.
That's absurd.
Yeah. So he came, it was crazy. You're like hiring this guy who's got 30 to 40 years of bank president experience, who has a little chip on his shoulder and wants to grow alongside you. Like you couldn't ask for more. And I had the opportunity to intern with him the summer after my freshman year. Like I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was interested in finance. And so finance for me was, a community bank. And he gave me like my first business book to read. And so I read a lot of books after that he had shared with me, or that books linked to other books and things like that. And so I wanted to work with him at some point in my career. And we talked pretty often. Like we would talk once a quarter, like since the time I'd interned for him. And I could also hear what was going on from Dad and my uncles at the bank, and would drop in on meetings if I was home with him. So I knew I wanted to work with him at some point, and he asked me to join the board while I was still in Chicago. So I had started, kind of being in on those board meetings, which is a little bit more involved than just dropping in on a meeting here and there. And I'm going to go pretty deep. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, how it actually kind of happened, because I don't want to gloss over it, especially, in 40 years if someone's listening, because I think this is important. So I joined the board, and one of the things you do at the board level is you have a strategic plan. And so I saw that strategic plan in March, and in January I had, kind of communicated to the Bluestein team that, hey, we're going to raise this fund together and I'm on board, like 100%. And that was my plan. Like I had zero plans of ever coming back to Kansas for a long time. Like I thought I was going to be involved with Bluestein for the next 7 to 10 years, because that's how normally, funds take to just get through that initial cycle. I had started talking with people in Kansas about investing. Some people had even like committed, and I was like, all right, yeah, this is the thing. I'm going to have a career in venture. And so that March board meeting, we went through our strategic plan, and there's a lot of red, like a lot of things that we wanted to get to, but just quarter after quarter, they just hadn't got done. And most of those things weren't around profitability or anything like that. It was more around strategic things like technology or process or organizational structure or things like that we wanted to do. And part of it was to grow. Like our focus was on growing organically and through mergers and acquisitions. And we wanted to do a lot more of that. So I saw that strategic plan, and it was just like hitting me. I was like, man, I've seen all these companies do this. I was really excited because I was like, okay, I can help with this kind of stuff, right? From a board level. And then I got home to Chicago. That board meeting was in person in Salina, and I just couldn't sleep, which is weird for me. Like I am a 2-3 minutes, head hits the pillow and I'm out, right? And I couldn't sleep, and I was just like, what is going on? Like, why am I thinking about this all the time? I usually never had that problem. And I'm a Christian, and I was praying, and I was like, God, like, what's going on? Like, just calm me down a little bit. Why am I thinking about this all the time? And yeah, it was like 3 days of that. I was completely exhausted. And I was still doing my job at Bluestein. That next weekend, we had done something we hadn't really done before with my uncle and his family and my parents and our family. We were going to do an offsite in San Antonio. And we were just trying to figure out, things like succession planning and things like that within more of the ag business. And it was just before that, and I was sharing what was going on with Leah. And Leah and I love Chicago, and Leah really loves Chicago. And I was like, Leah, I feel like God is like saying, hey, you need to walk through this door, which is all of these things, all these challenges and opportunities at the bank. I've put them in front of you, and you need to go push on that a little bit. And so I took most of those things and a few other things that I knew I was good at, and I wrote a job description, and I didn't even know like what to call it. I was just like corporate development. That's what I'll call it. And I took that, and then on that weekend when our families were all in San Antonio, I met with my dad, and I was like, hey, Dad, here's what's going on. We had this board meeting last week and kind of walked through the story with him. And I was like, am I just crazy right now? Should I even show this to Gene, our CEO? Like, I'm very happy doing what I'm doing in Chicago, but I was just explaining that last week to him, and I had this very, long list of job description, and it was things the bank needed. And he's like, yeah, I think, I'll share it with Gene, and maybe you guys should talk about it a little bit. I was like, okay, let's do it. No idea where this is going. And kind of long story short, we moved forward with it, and Gene was very supportive of it. And it just kind of turned Lee and I's life upside down because, we lived in Chicago for 5 years. We had a lot of friends and, a lot of career opportunities for both of us up there. And I accepted a job to come back, and I gave Ashley and Andrew a month's heads up and hired my replacement. And during that time, they're like, yeah, you can only leave if you go find the person to replace yourself. And so it was weird being like interviewing people for, at that time I was like an associate, interviewing people for the job, and they'd be like, yeah, so like, what are some projects we're going to work on? It's like, you're going to be working on them.
Yeah, this is you.
Yeah, you are replacing me. And it was a lot of fun. It was definitely hard to part ways with Andrew and Ashley, but they were really supportive and still involved with them to a certain extent. But my last day was like Friday, April 30th at Bluestein, and my first day at the bank was Monday, May 1st. So it was kind of crazy.
That you're walking that fine line of order and chaos in that in that excitement realm. Like that must have been such a chaotic period.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it totally was, because there were parts of like the venture world that becoming good at venture capital investing takes years. And you really don't know if things are going to turn out well until you've gone through a complete cycle of companies. And so I was a little hesitant because I was like, man, I don't even know if I'm good at this yet. Like, we made investments. Like, writing a check is easy in investing, but working through it and working through the cycles and continuing to grind on that is really hard. And that's why I have a ton of respect for Ashley and Andrew. Like, they've been at it a while, and they're going to continue at it. So
like that intuition, like following your gut, even though you're like, I've got a great job, man. Like, why do I got to do this? Is that something that you've experienced before? Would you say you're good at like trusting in yourself and following that feeling, or was that like the first time experiencing that?
Yeah, it's definitely not trusting myself. I mean, it's a lot of trusting in God. Yeah. Like that's all. Like people would think you're crazy. Like, you have an opportunity to be part of essentially the first fund with this awesome family doing venture capital stuff. Like, why in the world would you leave that? You're kind of going up the ramp, as it were, of normal careers. So not much trust in myself. Like I said, there's a lot of prayer and a lot of chaos, just in Lee and I's relationship, in moving. Like, I moved down here 6 months before she did. We didn't have a house. I was living in some basement apartment in Hutchinson, Kansas. And I think I took 25 flights to Chicago during that 6 months. It was chaotic. Like, it was very challenging.
What kept you, like, why didn't you go back on it?
Go back on?
Like, a lot of people will take a step in a direction and then they'll start to question themselves and they'll just immediately abort the decision and say, you know what, I'm going to go back to Chicago. Like, this isn't right. This is difficult. They face that first little piece of adversity. Yeah.
Man, that's a good question. I've never even had that thought before. I don't know. That's just part of my personality, I guess, is like, once you've made a decision, like, go for it.
Well, and I guess maybe, like, was there a bigger why for you? Like, you talked about earlier, why you're so dedicated and focused, just because, like, what you're aiming at and, like, you have a why, like a purpose behind it. Could that have been the same thing that was anchoring you in that situation, or?
No, I think there actually were a few things that made this kind of rational as well, of coming back. One, I wanted to work with Gene. Like, I have a huge respect for him, our CEO at the bank. I wanted to work with him at some time in my career. Like, this is a guy who knows banking inside and out. That's selfishly kind of one thing. And then the other thing was, I feel some responsibility for our family businesses to a certain extent. Not saying that I can necessarily affect all those, but I do feel a responsibility. And I thought, this is a place that I could add value. And I obviously have, the pushing, from God or that feeling that was there. Mm-hmm. And I said, the stars are never going to align, but I just got to, like, step forward on it and do this thing. So, it was, there wasn't a lot of trust in myself, to be honest with you, but I knew that what I had learned in Chicago would help, and that, some feathers would be ruffled from our normal processes. And I just think back the little over 2 years now of what we've been able to accomplish at the bank and the team we've brought together. We've nearly, well, I guess we have almost doubled in size in 2 years. So, which is very unorganic for a bank. And part of that was like mergers and acquisitions and things like that. But I mean, that is chaotic in a company. Especially one that's been at that point. Yeah, especially one that's been around for 100 and almost 20 years.
That's wild.
Yeah, it is.
Even think.
It is kind of crazy, and you can't do it without the support of the family, the shareholders, and we have some non-family shareholders as well. But you can't do it without the support of the shareholders and the management team and the talented people that are there. It really does take a team to move towards that, but also the willingness of people to be open to change. Like that's not easy, especially in family companies. A lot of people want to maintain that status quo, and that's usually what gets people, in trouble. Like most businesses that are family businesses fail in 3 generations because the first generation really just nails it, and they hit something, they hit a trend. There's a lot of hard work, and they're really successful. They've put in the work. The second generation doesn't want to break it. They're really cautious, which means a lot of times they don't change things that need to change. And then the third generation generally has no discipline when it comes to spending of family money. Yep. And they don't understand leverage, and they usually apply some big leverage to the family company, and then it just all unravels. And so just understanding, like I take that old Charlie Munger quote, like, tell me how I'm going to die and I'll never go there. And so a lot of the reading and things I do is just figuring out ways not to die. And then I learn how to build businesses kind of over here in this other area. But there's a lot of learning just how not to die. Like things that kill you are like leverage on your business. And in a banking world, like you are by definition 10 times levered all the time.
Because it's other people's money or?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But if you're making a loan to a company or a person, 10 cents, for the most part, I'll be general here, but 10 cents out of that loan or 10% out of that loan is your capital and 90% is the depositor's capital.
Yeah.
But if that loan goes bad, the loss is 100% to the owners of the bank.
Yeah.
So you're using that leverage to make the loan, and if it's successful, you'll make money off of that loan.
Right.
If it's not successful, all the loss goes directly to you. So in a very leveraged world like that, you have to be very intentional with processes, with being specific on what you're doing, measuring the risk. Risk management is super important in the financial world. So, I think you just have to have kind of that mindset of focus of change is okay, but it needs to be measured. And then the performance that we want to achieve, we have to be ambitious. We have to be realistic in the way that we do it. And then we have to get the team behind it to go after those things. So working with Gene, I saw him do a lot of that over the 8 years he worked with us before I came back. And I've seen him do it now in my day-to-day. I've seen other managers, and some of our other businesses do that as well. And I wanted to be part of that and just learn that piece of it. Because I learned a lot about company building and software and all that kind of stuff. But I guess until AI hits the singularity, there still has to be a lot of human involvement in the business. And so, that's kind of where we're at today.
Well, it's prideful too. Like it's your family business. Like you want to go in and have an impact in that and do something that, it's been around for 120 years. That's highly significant. To be able to play a small role in that, I can only imagine how cool that must be.
Yeah, you feel significant, but you also feel super insignificant,
right?
In the grand scheme of things. Like 5 generations ago, the founders of the bank, and they were entrepreneurs, by the way. They had started farming, and then they started a grain company, and then they started a bank. And I love embodying a lot of that as well and saying, hey, like the founding of our bank wasn't a family that was just chilling to do that. Like they had other businesses that they started and that they were managing while they started this bank. And so that's encouraged me to always be looking at other opportunities of things to start or things to partner on other people with. You only have so many hours in the day, and I have to be really intentional with my time and be super impactful and make sure that, the stuff that needs to get done gets done. But I'm also not afraid to look out and say, okay, how could this business or the family dynamic look in the next 20 years? Like that's my responsibility. And I got a lot of that from my grandpa. He essentially retired from the day-to-day operations of working in agriculture around the year I was born. So almost 30 years ago. And he just died this last year. So he wasn't necessarily the one driving the tractor or on a horse doing stuff. Mm-hmm. But what he started at that time, well, not started, but started kind of full-time, I guess, was the mentoring and the apprenticeship of his kids. And he really focused on that. Like, yeah, he was involved in big decisions like big land acquisitions or, the dairy kind of when it started back in the early 2000s and the expansion of the bank. Like, he was involved in a lot of that, but he realized that the best thing he could do was give over a lot of the day-to-day control to his kids in a lot of the different areas that they worked in. Some worked together, some worked separately, and that's fine. But then just being available, like some of the funnest memories with him, he, a lot of people think of like a family office or a family business, and they think that the matriarch or patriarch has like a corner office and they just kind of stay to themselves, right? The Warren Buffett deal, or like Sam Zell, but
up in the ivory tower.
Yeah. Grandpa has his office or had his desk in the middle of the office, like in the bullpen, essentially. And for the last, 30 years, every single day he got every piece of mail. He opened every piece of mail. And so he knew what was going on. He was the router of information. He knew every check that came in, every bill that came in. He read like 10 newspapers throughout the week coming from different towns or areas that we were doing business in. And so he just knew everything. And he had a phenomenal memory. So he could remember things from 50, 60 years ago or yesterday or whatever. And ultimately it was his body that failed him. He was 89. So, he lived a really full life. But, his memory was just so sharp. And he was able to take things that he had learned and communicate those, sometimes softly, sometimes a little bit more, kind of, I guess, he would just tell you what he was thinking.
Yeah, and, pretty bluntly.
yeah. And he would always just have a stack of stuff on his desk. And if you sat in that seat across from him, heads up. He was like, hey, read this, take a look at that, see what this thing did. Can you believe this bill's that much? Blah, blah, blah. And it was awesome.
Yeah.
He was just throwing stuff at you all the time. And sometimes you're like, I don't think I'm going to learn anything about this or like what this means. But you just felt like you were just, what's the word? Like almost like an ice bath. Like you're just in it.
Yeah. You're absorbing it.
Yeah. It was so fun. So, like I said, really miss him, but he really just showed what stewardship of the family business can be.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's about not making it about you.
Yeah, you're wearing a really cool ring that I'd asked you about last week, and I think you alluded to there's a little bit of a story there with your grandpa, but I'd love to hear kind of like the connection of your grandpa and why you're wearing his ring still.
Yeah, so actually it's a new ring to me, going through kind of his estate and things, just luck of the draw. I actually wasn't able to be there when they were going through some of his belongings and stuff, but I thought it was really cool, and so I asked my sister, I was like, hey, if I have an opportunity to get that ring, I think that'd be super cool. And my wife makes fun of me a little bit for wearing a ring. She's like, oh, you're a ring guy now. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. But no, it's really both rings. And it's just a tangible reminder. Both of them are, this wedding ring with Leah is not only my relationship with Leah, but a covenant relationship with God and Leah, right? Like, even though stuff doesn't make sense and it gets hard, I'm still in it with her always, and my relationship with God is the only reason that marriage and relationship works. And so that's like the most important one. And I wasn't planning on becoming a ring guy, but I really like this one because it just always reminds me of the humility and the responsibility of stewardship. Like when I look at it, I'm like, hey, like, the family, the generations are going to go round and round, similar to your marriage, and it's my responsibility to do the best I can to help steward, our family business in the best way that I think I can. And I won't always get it perfect. Prior generations haven't always got it perfect, but it's just tangibly there that, hey, you can make a difference today. And you should do the best you can to serve your family and the people that work in our businesses. Like, they are our customer, they're our partners, they're our friends, our neighbors, and there's a lot of responsibility there.
Yeah.
And you feel that within a business, and you're about to feel it when you start this restaurant. the consequences of your decisions, consequences of your actions towards people, that affects them when they go home. The way they feel, the way they treat their spouse or kids. If you treat them badly, chances are some of that might get passed on to their family.
Yeah.
You affect their kids' college fund. You affect their kids' food on the table at night if you miss a paycheck. And I became very aware of that when my paycheck didn't get paid in Chicago.
Yeah.
I was like, I will never do that to a human being, because fortunately I had the wherewithal to withstand it and the savings to withstand it. But I was like, man, I can't imagine if that happened to someone else who was living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And you can't judge people for that. Everyone's going through their own thing. But it's your responsibility as a steward of the business, as a steward of a family and the culture and things like that. And I'm not the only one that does it in my family. It's just I have to remind myself tangibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so important.
Well, and it seems like your grandpa was a really good mentor to you and someone that, you went to for advice and that you respected a lot. And so to have that symbolic reminder that you physically wear and can look down at and fiddle with, I'm sure that is a really neat element too.
Yeah. Anytime, I've only started wearing it over the past, month or so here, but yeah, it just kind of calms you down a little bit when you kind of just sit there and think about it. 'Cause it's like, hey, the sun's going to go down tonight. It's going to it's going to go up tomorrow. Whatever we're thinking through or challenge we're going through, it's going to be all right. And you just need to treat people well. And you also have to be accountable for your decisions and accountable for the things you say you're going to do, and go after it. So,
what would you say what are you aiming towards? There's so many things that you're involved in, and we've talked about a lot of times your work ethic, but at the end of the day, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, what is it that matters to you? Yeah,
there's no end point. Except death, right? That is, quote, an end point. But if you're a Christian, obviously you believe that life goes beyond that. So I don't have an end point. I'm not trying to really make a certain amount of money. Now, when you're in a business, you do some planning. You say, hey, we're going to try to make this amount of money this year. But that's such a small part of it. For the most part, people in finance trying to make businesses really complicated with spreadsheets, but it really comes down to a couple things. It's do I have money coming in the door? How much money am I spending? How much money do I have left over?
Yeah.
And then what do I do with that? Do I use it on my own personal gain or things I want to do, or do I reinvest it in the business? That's pretty much it. And so I would say my goals are to do the best I can with what I have. So I didn't choose to be born into the family I'm born into. I did choose to come back. That was a big decision. But I think, what does success look like? I think it's aggressively growing our business in a responsible way. I think there are ways to grow responsibly and ways to grow irresponsibly. You have to take some chances in life, but like I said, a lot of the decisions are consequential for more people than just me. And so perhaps that can handicap you. When you look at successful businesses, sometimes if it's just one person, it's just their money, they scale so quickly because they're fine being broke. Well, I can't do that in our business because it's not all my money, for one. And two, I just wouldn't feel right about that for our team. But you can still grow really aggressively, doubling in size over the last couple years. That is very abnormal. And the fact that we probably want to do that again over the next, few years as well, that's abnormal. And so you just have to be measured with it. You have to get the right team. And I think success for me would be doing business the right way. At the end of my life, when we had Grandpa's funeral this last year, the amount of people that just showed up because they had done business with him for years, we'd been partners or they interacted with him in various ways, and for people to come up and say, you're never going to believe what your grandpa did for me, or he treated me so well when blank. That's such a reward. And I'm sure people have told him that along the way, but hearing it from other people to you, man, that's so rewarding. And so, yeah, I think that would be really cool. But in the meantime, like I said, I like to live on kind of the edge of chaos. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm just going to keep setting with our current businesses, and then other things I'm working on, kind of full blow go on those as well.
And as much as you're comfortable sharing, what are the family businesses?
So yeah, most of the family works in agriculture, farm, ranch. We're partners in a dairy as well, and then underlying some of that farming and ranching is real estate ownership. And so one of the things, and I don't know, if Grandpa planned this all along, but there's a lot of co-ownership of assets and things with aunts and uncles and cousins and things like that. And so, as much as family business drives people apart in a lot of places and a lot of businesses, I think it also brings you together, especially when it's a very slim margin of control or no control, and you have to collaborate on things. And so most of the family's involved in the business. I'm the only I'm one of 5 siblings. I'm the only brother that doesn't wear a cowboy hat on a daily basis. My brothers and even my brother-in-law, they are very, very ag focused, with cattle and ranching and farming. And that's kind of the family business on the ag side.
We need you to get the cowboy hat. Like, that should have been something that happened today.
We can do it in 5 years on the next podcast. I have a few at home, so whenever you're ready. Yeah,
Cooper was walking in today, and the joke was something along the lines like, "It didn't work out today. I was going to make you wait 5 more years." So I guess that's when part 2 is going to come out.
Yeah, it might be sooner than that. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I guess I didn't even mention this. We're 90 minutes into it. Congratulations, man! You're the first episode to be done in the restaurant.
Oh, cool. Yeah. It's getting better.
yeah. If you're watching the video, you can see like the white brick behind us. They're working on some of the finishing right now, but it is utter chaos, all hands on deck in here. But the last time Cooper was in here, it was just a blank shell. Like, it was literally just concrete walls. There's no heat, no AC, nothing in here.
Doesn't it feel pretty representative, like, of where we're at in our careers, though? Like, this really does feel like where we're at. And I'm just so comfortable being here with just nothing's completely done. And I'm still poking around because I'm like, I just want to see like what's going on. It is really representative of kind of where we're at. Like, it's not all put together yet.
Yeah, no, is it ever all put together though?
For some people, yeah, not us.
Yeah, I was gonna say that picture is nowhere in sight for me.
I can see it though. I mean, like I said, last time I was here, it was just concrete floor, and you've come a long ways.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at once, and it's been a pretty wild process, honestly. Like, I look at everything in here and just the amount of learning lessons from each item and the pain points of, like we were talking in the kitchen earlier. And yeah, there's a lot that has gone into this build out process.
Yeah, but I can appreciate it. Like I was telling you, we were walking around and I was like, "Can I see your bathrooms?" we're working on like remodeling some bathrooms at the bank, and I want to see like what your setup is. And that's like
everything becomes a data point. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's crazy. When we were, one of the projects I worked on early on at the bank was we were working on an online account opening for bank accounts. Like most small banks don't have that, and some of them are starting to get that. Like, you can just open a bank online with any of the big banks, and that was one of the things we realized for our customers that we wanted. And so that's one of my first projects. And just out of curiosity, like kind of how I do most things, I went around and I think I opened 20 bank accounts in Wichita.
Jeez.
And I just took my phone, and each one was like, you bring $100 or whatever, put it in the account. But I brought my phone and I would start a timer from the time I started talking with a person to see, okay, what are the questions they're asking? Like, are they really good at bringing in customer information? How long does it take?
Yeah.
And then also measured our open time in our bank, and then see what the process is with technology and follow-up emails and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I've always been like that. Just you have to go try the thing to see what other folks are doing.
And you have to observe it too. Like, whenever I go to eat, one of the big restaurant metrics is like, I'm forgetting the word now. It's like cook time. Like, how long does it take to get your food out to the table? And so I'm actively, whenever I go eat somewhere, I'll start a timer, and then I'll try not to let other people see. And then I'll take a note of like, when am I like, I wish the food would have been here by now. And then whenever other people at the table start complaining about where's the food, it's kind of like little data point. Okay, you got to be quicker than this. You got to be quicker than that. And just collecting all of those little metrics it's really weird. It's only started to happen like the last 3 or 4 years for me, where it's like everything is just kind of adding up in my head like a giant database.
Do you take a picture of like the table setting or anything?
Oh yeah. I mean, I take pictures, I write notes down. I do a lot of things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, Cooper, as we start to wrap up here, man, you have almost no social media presence, but where can people find you online?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Cooper Clawson. I'm also on Twitter. I haven't been tweeting much over the last kind of oh gosh, 6-7 months. I've been, kind of working on some side projects and a lot of stuff at the bank. But yeah, you can DM me on Twitter or LinkedIn and we can catch up there.
Love it. You can find me on Instagram at Jacob O'Connor. The podcast is at Real Period Conversations or at Real Period. Yeah, I did say that right. Sometimes you say it so many times over, you start tripping over it. Cooper, my last question for you. Looking back at this really cool journey you've been on, what advice would you offer to your 22-year-old self?
Yeah, I would. I think the biggest challenge I had was a lot of self-confidence. I just seen so many people accomplish so many things, and the managers I was talking to at the foundation or, my family. And one of those impactful books that Gene gave me to read that first summer was a book called Failing Forward by John Maxwell. And so I would say not necessarily 22, but I'd say the biggest pivotal thing that made a difference for me at 19 was just, hey, you will fail. And like just understanding that piece is so important. Like you will fail at some point, but here's how to fail forward. Just that confidence early on, I think is hard to have. Like when you really get into it. So I would say, hey, just be confident, try things out, experiment, and it'll all take care of itself as long as you work hard and you treat people right.
Love it. Thanks for coming on, Cooper.
Cool.